Hi, everybody. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Great to have you with me. I'm in San Francisco today on the road at the Future Food Tech Conference. Such knowledge drops happening here in the last 2 days. It's been a jam-packed Thursday and Friday of fantastic international interesting speaker after interesting speaker, and I've decided to pull one of them aside with me today. I want to welcome my guest, who is the head of Agri-Food Investing at Temasek in Singapore, Anuj Maheshwari. Thanks for being with me.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for having me today.
So much to talk about. National security, investing strategies, the plant-based market in general. Where is it going? So much to dive into. First, I'll start with taking a step back and talking a little bit about Singapore and Singapore's strategy for the future in terms of food, and perhaps we'll even say national security as the conversation carries on. Little background for people. Singapore currently imports about 90% of its food, so it only makes about 10% of its food, and there's a program called 30 by 30 in which it wants to make 30% of its own food by 2030. I'm wondering, as head of the Agri-Food Investing arm of Temasek, how does your strategy fit with 30 by 30?
Elizabeth, the 30 by 30 strategy is really a food security strategy, but it's also a strategy which fits in with a modern, sustainable food system. There's some research that, as the urbanization happens around the world, over 65% of the people live in cities, that cities will have to learn to feed themselves. If you step back, our food system is basically one of where the rural world produces the food. That's why our fields are outside of the cities, and we then haul this food and bring it for the consumers who are largely in the cities. The cities have the wastage, they have the circularity problem. So what Singapore is looking for is not only that we are able to secure our food by producing it locally, but we can also create a sustainable food system, which is not just something that could be great for Singapore, but in a world where we will have 30 mega cities in the next 10, 20 years, it could be replicated in other parts of the world as well. But what is very interesting, but it's not very easy to produce 30% of your food when you don't have land and when you don't have water with it. So the key to achieving that is really innovation. And the key to achieving that is rethinking how food is produced. As we know very well, food is a very resource intensive affair. 50% of land gets used in producing food. 30% of the world's population is involved in food production. We use 70% of the world's water. That is not possible in an urban food system. So those kinds of innovation is what excites us as Temasek. Not only does it have a social good, a political good in terms of achieving food security, but new interesting business models about decreasing the resource intensity of food can come in, and hopefully consumers in cities can get local, fresh, and hopefully more nutritious food out of something like the Singapore 30 by 30.
Mm-hmm. And how much does Temasek get involved with the companies that it invests in to help them work out this strategy that might be replicated around the world?
Right. So this is really a government mandate, and this is a mandate that the government is funding through its own programs. It's giving grants, it's giving other things. That's not really the role of Temasek. We are really an investor who looks at the commercial returns of the companies we invest in. Now, of course, when we are a very conscious investor and a responsible investor, so we want our companies to do good. But by and large, any company that is in the food sector is doing good for the world, producing more food in it. One of the initiatives that we launched last year is something called the Asia Sustainable Foods Platform, whereby we are helping companies who want to grow in Asia, offering them operating and scale up expertise, as well as shared infrastructure like fermentation tanks and extrusion facilities to grow. So we do work with those companies to help them grow in Asia, which includes Singapore. But really, that's really where we get involved as an investment firm, as a venture capital firm, to help companies realize their potential. And some of these companies like Growthwell, like Next Gen Foods, are in Singapore and therefore are going to play a role in the 30 by 30.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And one might think that Temasek is focused only on Asia, but of course, that's not true. You have investments all around the world.
Absolutely. We are really a global investment house. We happen to be headquartered in Singapore. We have a very international team. In our agri-food team, we have members who are in San Francisco, in New York, in London, obviously in China and India as well. In fact, our whole journey in agri-tech, food tech started with investments here in California, in San Francisco. Our first investment was a company called Hampton Creek. We then
Now eat just.
now it just I still like to call it Hampton Creek because that's how it started, with Josh Tetrick. We then invested into Impossible Foods, in Perfect Day. So we really saw what was happening over here in this part of the world, and now that narrative has actually come very strongly in Asia as well. So we are continuing to invest in Asia and China, but really we see still California as the hotbed for innovation in alternative foods.
So all the brands that you've mentioned, Impossible Foods, Eat Just, Hampton Creek, these are CPG brands. But prior to that, you mentioned that you're actually investing up and down the supply chain. So bioreactors and the infrastructure. There's such a bottleneck in plant-based innovation and alternative proteins for co-manufacturing. Can you share with us your supply chain strategy for investing if you have one?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right that look, as the scale up of this sector happens, it's not just there are two kind of scale ups that I want to talk about. One is the scale up of innovation, better products, both in terms of sensory experience as well as in terms of nutritional profile needs to come into the market. The second thing is that we need to be able to provide share infrastructure and capacity for companies to grow. Now, that is physical manufacturing capacity. Some of our companies which have been in the market are already facing capacity constraints with that. Fermentation is a good example of it. Contract fermentation is a tough business because there are very specific things with in terms of how the microbe works and how scale up works. Having been investors in companies like Amyris, we know that this is challenging. But the more important, but the good thing is technology has really come up quite far in terms of precision fermentation. But the sheer capacity and the capex is an issue. So what we have done is in Singapore, we announced a joint venture with ADM last year. This joint venture will, for example, and there are other examples as well, this joint venture will help work with food techs to scale up microbial fermentation. So essentially, if you're a food tech, you could come to this joint venture of ours with ADM and say, hey, I would like to either hire a fermenting tank or work with you as I move from lab scale to pilot scale to industrial scale, and potentially even have you as my long-term supplier for the product while I focus on what I might be good at, which is innovation and product marketing and bringing the product to the market as well. So this is really the start of the journey for all of us in this sector. It's come a long way in the last 5-7 years, much more than what we thought. But these are the kind of experiments that we are doing in order to add capacity to the industry, and this is the start with a Singapore based venture, but hopefully we can take it in other parts of the world as well.
You've said so many things that I want to unpack there. I work with VegTech Invest, and we're in the public markets, and we invest in this space up and down the supply chain in the public markets. We also invest in Amyris, think that they are such a wonderful, innovative company. And then you contrast that to ADM, this huge international, multinational company. I'm starting to see innovation from companies like Amyris pop up all over the place. And then places like Ingredion, ADM, that say, I'm going to partner with what used to be considered too small. Absolutely. Too small of a player. And now you're seeing these partnerships of really David and Goliath come together. It's an interesting new web. What sort of predictions can you make about? We all know that the global food supply system is shifting. That we know, we have no choice, it's happening. But these kind of interesting partnerships, what do you see coming out of that?
No, absolutely. Look, I think it's fascinating. When we started this journey, we spoke to all the big boys, the names, some of the names you talked about, other names. There was such a amount of skepticism. This doesn't work. Cost is going to be an issue. How are you going to scale up? Well, customers are not going to like it. Remember GMO, and I think the tide has completely shifted, where the forward-looking large corporates, the Goliaths, are now much more in the partnership mode. They want to work with these companies. They realize that real innovation is coming out of it. So we see that and we see ourselves somewhere in the middle between being able to put large amount of capital to work, but more as a pure play investor. So we can provide that long term strategic capital, but we do not come with necessarily some of the constraints that the strategic investor comes in. Coming to your point in terms of predictions, I certainly see these kinds of partnerships going stronger and stronger going forward. All my conversations with the large companies, and some of them, many of them we have seen over here, are very much forward looking. They've created separate teams, they've created CVCs. I got to know some of the investment dollars that they have made, and I was completely taken back, Elizabeth. These are not small amounts that these companies are putting in. So they're putting some serious capital behind some of these startups, and that's only going to increase, hopefully.
And do they see this as a yes and? So, in addition to the animal feed that ADM produces, and they're continuing to produce animal feed,
Yeah.
this is alternative proteins and plant based innovation is a yes and play, or do they ultimately see it as a replacement down the line?
Look, it's an interesting question because I don't think any of us knows that. We can have our views about where it is going to go, but the reality is that as we it's like as we are trying to make the food system more efficient, we also have to continue to feed the world. So it's like you have to drive a car at 60 miles an hour, and you still have to turn it and make it better. You don't have the luxury to stop it, fix the car, and then start it. I mean, we just can't do that. We have a growing amount of people to for. So I think there is a balance in terms of how much disruption happens. The efficiencies are going to be there. So I think large companies, whether it's the Cargills or the ADMs or the Olams of the world, play a very important role in providing food, in a efficient way, in a reasonably efficient way, at a low cost way to people around the world. I think but many of these companies know that digital biotech, plant-based is a force to reckon with. Whether it's going to be 10%, 30%, or we're going to eliminate animal agriculture completely is too early to predict. But if history has its way, we used to use a horse carriage to move from one place to another, and I'm sure you have read a lot of books. Nobody thought that horses will be eliminated. In fact, you used to take horses used to go and fill up the gas in the early Ford cars, because there were no petrol stations or gas stations, as you call it, and people thought, how are you going to have this infrastructure to have gas? Well, you can always find oat everywhere, and the horse can graze on the grass by the side of the road, so you never run out of fuel in a horse. But so history has its own way, and we have seen when a new technology comes in, it becomes all encompassing. But I think it's too early to predict, and I would imagine that these companies are really looking at it as a new area of focus rather than it's going to eliminate the existing system completely.
Yeah, so much to unpack there as well. First of all, I'll say it's the horse and buggy. It's also the typewriter. Anuj, are you using a typewriter?
No, I do have one of those old typewriters still kept at home as a vintage typewriter
A
now.
piece of art
Piece of
now.
art
Yeah.
now. But so many things have, and we can go back, that things have been eliminated. When a better technology has come in, the old technology has more or less gone away. I just say, food, is it the same? Is it different? Because, at the end of it, there was the same typewriter that you used in every part of the world. Yes, different font, but the typewriter was a typewriter. The printing press was a printing press. The horse in the carriage was there. Food is an emotional topic. It's how you grow up and all of that. So we'll see how fast the transition happens.
We'll see, but Gen Z and millennials, they're growing up on plant-based. It's what they know. They don't have to make this decision that you and I make of, is it new? Am I going to like it? It was served to them at 5 years old. So we'll see as the generations move on, we'll see how the food supply
Absolutely.
system.
And the biggest prediction is that I see is this starts becoming real in my own household. We don't eat any beef. And now, I don't know if you've seen the statistic that every household has about 13 recipes that they keep on. These are your high frequency recipes that every time you continue to use. And we have seen alternate protein coming into at least two of those recipes. So it's real. Conscious households are already making the transition, and when it enters into home recipes in certain households, it's when it starts becoming real, because everybody can go to a restaurant and say, hey, let me try something new and fancy. But is it really getting into the mainstream? Milk became big because it became into the mainstream. What's there for dinner? Beef became a regular beef dish. So are we getting into home recipes? Plant-based foods is the key question.
What are the two recipes? Because I didn't know that.
It's the Impossible lasagna, and my wife has figured out a way to make nuggets from plant-based, soy-based plants. So those are the two recipes.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, I two more questions before we go, because I know we both have busy days. But I actually, one is maybe more a statement that you can comment on. I actually think as consumer behavior shifts, that's wonderful, but it wouldn't be enough to tip the needle. Excuse me. What I see is that because industry is getting behind this, excuse me, you have this tailwind of consumers shifting, and then as well you have industry behind them wanting a better business. Because animal agriculture is so inefficient. It's not good for the bottom line. There's a lot of waste in land and water and time, and ultimately these things mean it's more expensive. So as we scale and bring down price, you're just going to see a more efficient business equation, and all industries want a more efficient business equation. So now you add consumer shifting behavior backed by industry that isn't going to block them.
Increasingly, we think industry is an ally rather than blocking, and that's a big change in the last 5 years. Absolutely.
I think it's that combination that will make this shift inevitable. But we do have hurdles, I'll say. GMO went down a path, and I don't know if we'll ever get that conversation back. So GMO can be nefarious, but it isn't nefarious by definition. Indeed, I would argue that to feed a growing population of 10 billion by 2050, according to the UN, you're going to have GMO. It's not going to be possible. And indeed, GMO is already existent in your seeds and your seed hybrids, and in ways you don't even realize. But that conversation's been lost with the consumer, and I don't know how we'd get it back. We have to be careful about what happens with plant-based and how we talk about these things. I wonder if Temasek has any thoughts about communicating to the consumer.
No, absolutely. Look, this is a very important part of communicating with the consumer, and this is something that one of the things you asked, what do you do in Singapore? One of the areas that we want some of the local Singaporean research institutes to focus on is to have the communication strategy with consumers and lead it with transparency, with confidence, and make sure we communicate to the consumers what's in it for them. And the challenge with GMO was the consumer was getting was thinking it might he or she wasn't getting a real direct benefit, but they were getting that perceived risk. What if it doesn't work? And that's where it became a B2B technology, where the C was taking the risk but not getting the benefit out of it. Now in plant-based, we really need to make sure that the consumer is the winner, and the consumer is the winner because obviously the consumer cares about the environment, but a direct tangible way that he or she affects the environment is a very important benefit we have to highlight. They don't want to compromise on the sensory experience. In fact, is there a way to provide them a better sensory experience going forward? But I think the most important thing that the industry needs to focus on increasingly is the nutrition side of it. We cannot avoid nutrition. I think plant-based foods in the first generation have been on certain high level macro parameters, amount of protein value are the same and all of that stuff. But if you really dig deeper, and I talk to some of the scientists, when it comes to bioactives and phenols and other certain compounds, they might be lacking in that. And I think going forward with the second generation of startups and more R&D coming in, we just need to provide consumers that they're not compromising, but they might be getting something better ahead with it. So if the consumer gets something, that is a winner. And I do not believe that this is only going to be about price. I think there's a value play here. You offer somebody something better, they're ready to pay for it. I mean, a good example is an iPhone, right? You don't put value to an iPhone. You just look at the new features. There's no way to put value to it. Food is something we put in our bodies. Our life depends on food on a daily basis. Why do we start thinking about it as a cost play? We really need to improve what you're getting out of it, the nutrition, the sensory benefits, and all of that with it. So I do think that communication is very important, and communication is a very subjective cultural thing. How you communicate in the United States is very different from how you would communicate in a Vietnam and Indonesia, and more focus needs to get into it. So very much agree.
Yes, an enormous topic and so much to unpack. But ultimately, the consumer is more and more educated. COVID gave us that tailwind to take. They want to take their own health back. It used to be, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, industry told you what to eat. Big companies like Nestle, they just told you that's what you eat. And now, particularly millennials and Gen Z, they're very discerning. They read those labels, they want to know, and they don't want to know just nutrition, although that is a huge driving factor. And it's a factor that we have to upgrade in what we do. Not that we don't have a good system now, but it's better to not just be at parity with nutrition, but we can be better. We can be the thing that you can't get elsewhere, because meat and dairy are done innovating. They're at the end of their innovation life cycle. We're just beginning. So we can have much better propositions there. But it's interesting for the consumer to, as you say, not bear that risk and have that added benefit. Okay, our last question. I said that I had a last question, but this is actually the last question now. So I'm wondering, with all that you do, if governments are asking you to consult with them. Obviously, you're working in tandem with Singapore, but are other governments asking you to work with them? Because food security, I believe in the future, wars will be fought over food and water. Food insecurity, which already exists today with climate change, will only be exacerbated if we don't change our food supply systems to be more efficient so that we can produce more food in an inexpensive way that travels less far, that is more nutritious. If we can't make that shift, if we can't turn the car, then we will experience the end result, which is food insecurity. And then you have, pressure between governments. It's hard to be in trade talks when one country controls the food and the other country doesn't. So I would think food as an issue of national security would be on governments' minds around the world. Are you seeing this?
Absolutely, I think food security was getting into the government's minds as we got into COVID, with all the shortages we saw, and then it continued to be on it because we were seeing inflation coming in, and now with the Ukraine-Russia crisis, where there is a real issue this time around, versus in COVID, where there's a disruption of supply chains, but really the supply patterns didn't change. Now here, supply patterns are changing. It is a top of the agenda for most governments, including governments which thought that they don't have a food problem going forward. So the answer to that question is absolutely yes. When it comes to what the governments are beginning to do, it's really they're getting their act together. They're figuring it out as we speak on what they need to do. What I worry sometimes about is governments start taking knee-jerk reactions. They start blocking trade when trade is actually good. If you're a wheat producer, you want to stop exporting wheat, and if you want to stop exporting wheat, and then that really disrupts the supply chain. So actually, food security needs to be tackled by having a more transparent trading system around the world. More trade is good for food. A lot of we haven't, to your question, have governments come and have we consulted governments? We're not in the business of telling governments what to do, but of course what certain governments around the world see is what Singapore has done, the Singapore Food Agency has done, and to the extent that Temasek is a global investor and they want to learn from Singapore, we certainly are help and showcase what we have done. We are still in the beginning of our own journey to achieve greater food security, but our specific idea is that in a small city state, how do we innovate through vertical agriculture, through having more technology, through alternate protein, because we won't be having chicken farms in Singapore. So our way of doing it is going to be different, and many governments are interested in learning from that. They are, and we are open to sharing as much as we can. So absolutely, this is an important topic in the minds of the governments.
Yes, and Singapore has shown, so not only what Temasek is doing, but obviously Singapore being open to this and having a policy around 30 by 30, and being the first country in the world to allow cultivated meat to be served in restaurants. Were you a part of helping that happen? And have you tried Good Meat? Sorry, have you tried Good Meats, which is Eat Just's division of cultivated meat? Have you tried Good Meats cultivated chicken?
Absolutely, I've tried Good Meat cultivated chicken. multiple times. It's now available in Singapore. The company does a good job of not just serving you the food, but telling you the story. Food is about emotion. The story is very important. Where you eat your food is as important as what you eat. Sometimes that's why you go to a nice restaurant. So I think the company's done a good job, and I think it's done a good job of educating at least a lot of important stakeholders that this could be real, and that's why it's so interesting. I think the Singapore Food Agency is obviously a forward-looking agency. They looked at it and approved it because it is safe, and they are very thorough with their analysis. But look, this is still an emerging science, so it will continue to develop. But I'm hoping in 2022 and beyond, more and more governments would take that view that approving new novel sources of protein is good. You all saw, and Elizabeth, you saw in China in the recent sort of writings, in the 5-year plans that they mentioned about other sources of protein coming from microbials and plants, not just animals. So that's a big move. So governments around the world are noticing, and they are realizing that protein is an important thing, and they need to diversify the sources of protein. So
yeah, I think very interesting. China putting that stake in the ground, I think, had all governments around the world paying attention. Again, the political power that one government would have if they control food in any major way, I think has everybody thinking. So very interesting. Well, of course, Temasek and the Singapore Food Agency, two different agencies altogether, and the government and Temasek, two completely different agencies. And yet you are here talking about Singapore. So thank you for doing that. I mean, though everyone realizes that Temasek is its own individual investing agency, which is very busy doing deals around the world. You do about, I think if I read correctly on your website, about 75 deals a year. Is that right?
Temasek, we don't disclose how many deals we do, but look, in our agri-food sector, I can tell you that since we started this team in 2013, really from a couple of people to now over 10 people doing this, we have invested over $8 billion in the sector. We have over 25 food tech, agri-tech companies, at least 7, 8 of them, some of the names I already shared, have done very well. Their valuations have increased. They've really launched products, hundreds of $millions of revenue out there. And we just think that, you saw AgFunder announce yesterday $52 billion of funding. I can tell you, Elizabeth, and my friends from the deal teams of those early companies we invested $10-20 million in, we never thought that this would even cross $1 billion when we were talking to them in 2014. So it's come a long way. And I think this funding is going to continue, and Temasek is going to continue to play not just a role as an active investor, but hopefully help in continue to maintain this momentum towards the industry, because food transition is a marathon. It's not happening. We're just in the beginning of where we were, beginning of the start. This has a long way to go. And this, unlike many other things, needs not just the participation of investors and innovators. The consumers are important because they need to change. The farmers who need to change. The governments who need to change. And hopefully the beneficiary is the earth and the people at large.
And I'll add to that the banking system, those who loan money, because there's risky loans, there's venture investing, and then there's conservative loaning, so debt capital, et cetera. So we're talking about a shift really of the entire supply system.
Absolutely. And I think the number of even banks I see over there, bankers from some of the big bracket banks hanging around in this conference, just shows that people have taken notice. I'm sure there are skeptics out there who think, hey, this is another fad. This is not going to work. These are capex intensive industries. Well, food can just be a brand. It can't really be a technology play. And you've seen this, there have been skeptics all around. But I think, as we have proven with with companies which are coming with real products, that look, there is real innovation. Innovation is key.
It's such an exciting time. I want to thank you, Anuj, for being with me here today and all that you do. A quick exit question, one word only. You're super busy. You don't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
Snack, I would say lentils. I've discovered lentils are great chips, and I try to find them every now and then.
Lentil chips?
Lentil chips, yes. I source them from India because they're there, and I'm hoping there will be a company that can actually bring it to the global markets.
I leave you all on lentil chips. I want to thank you for being with me, Anuj. What a great knowledge drop. That's what future food tech is all about, getting to speak with so many critical individuals, really thought leaders leading the space and shifting our global food supply system. It's been a special plant-based business hour. I never come to you on Friday mornings. I always come to you on Tuesdays, but it's great to be with you here live from Future Food Tech. Everybody, I will see you on Tuesday. Thank you, Anuj, for being with me.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me, and great conversation.
Bye, everybody.